Good afternoon, everybody. It's Gordon Stone here. I'm one of the presenters and mentors of the Northern Beef Business Mentoring Program. Today we're joined by Mark McNamee, one of our co-presenters and a bit of a specialist, I might say, in markets, customers and thinking about products. Mark, how are things?
Yeah, good, thanks, Gordon. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Mark. Thanks for joining us again. Just to recap for those people who are joining us for the first time, our objective with the Northern Beef Business Mentoring Program is really to focus on the business side of the operation as opposed to the production side. So that accounts for our topic about your marketplace defining your product rather than the other way around. So I think this will become apparent as we go through the webinar. Essentially though, what we're talking about here is asking the marketplace to pull through a high value product rather than us trying to push a lower value product into the marketplace. But more of that in a few minutes. We're going to have around about 30 minutes for this webinar. That's our objective every time because we're very aware of people's time commitments. Some of you I know are joining us by telephone, others of us are joining by computer. So those of you who are by phone, you will have received copies of slides, so please follow us there. For those of you on computer, you'll notice in the top right hand corner the GoToWebinar icons, and you'll also notice that you are muted, and that's part of our, I guess, our issue for managing download speeds and so on. What that means though is that you can actually still put questions into the question area of that those icons, and Dave, one of our observers, will just be gathering those questions up, and if we have time at the end he'll report a summary of those questions which we'll answer. Alternatively, if there are some burning questions that emerge, you'll also notice that there'll be an opportunity for us to answer those questions later. And you'll also notice at the end of this webinar that we'll ask you to give us a response and some feedback. That's because this program is brought to you by a number of partners, most notably ourselves along with the MLA donor company, also AgForce, Department of Agriculture and Fisheries in Queensland, and our recent partner, Moore Stephens Queensland, a mid-tier accounting firm. And so we're always looking for ways of refining what we're doing. That's what the objective of that feedback process is about. So I'll deal with the Northern Beef Business Mentoring Program a bit further along. I think it's important for us to now get started. And I'll beg your pardon, I just need to Okay, sorry, a little bit of housekeeping there. So the 12 pillars of business best practice. I'm fresh from a meeting last week where people asked me, what do you really mean by business? Isn't that all wrapped up into production? The way I look at it is very simply like this. Regard business and production as a bit like an egg. The yolk of the egg is the gold. It's the production of the product. Unless, though, the eggshell that sits around it, which is the market, the products and the customer side of things, unless that's high value, the question is why would you be producing a product or lower value product when you could be producing a higher value product? As you move towards creating a high performing business, then the white of the egg is the bit that contains the yolk and sits within the eggshell. So these are our 12 pillars of business best practice. I'll go through them very quickly as part of the recap process. It's very important for us to have a clear vision about where the business is going. Some would say a roadmap, so it's very specific about where we're heading to. We'll be talking much today about markets, products and customers, which is our pillar 2, and that's part of the concept of having a very clear end in mind of where the most money is to be made. Thinking and acting in a corporate sense. So as businesses grow, there are things around these business best practice pillars that need to be brought into a business so that the business can remain tidy. And that's part of this idea of thinking a bit like a corporate and then growing into your shoes as a corporate entity. Obviously, we're talking always about money and the profitability of things, thinking about the people who are involved in the business and thinking systematically about running the business. And it's easier for people to run a very systematized business than one where the systems are a little bit awry. The value of that is when we're actually looking to expand the business, our people and our systems are very specifically behind the game plan. That always leads us to the question of business risk and legals, particularly in today's marketplace. And we're focusing very much on areas of business risk, and when we're looking at the money, our marketplace, our customers and so on are quite critical. Pillar 9 is more, in our view, about what we call the end in mind. So people are very specific about where they're taking their business to in the future. So the succession process is actually set up right from the very beginning. As it says here, it may be about handing over the business to another generation or selling it to somebody else. Or it may be transitioning it in some way so that the owners, for example, would like to stay working in the business or working on the business but remove themselves to a large extent from it. Now we're moving into pillars 10, 11 and 12, which are very pertinent to today's discussion. Because it may be that in order to get the right product into the right market, we may have to work with other people. That's where the idea of joint ventures or alliances come in. Or we may look at some way in which we can leverage the value of what the product that we're producing. Inevitably, we have to set up relationships with the marketplace. And so some people get hung up on sales and marketing, but effectively it's about building relationships and communicating with the marketplace. So those pillars 2, 10, 11 and 12 are the areas of our big focus in today's workshop. So some of the very critical principles about the marketplace are about defining the product. And Mark is going to take us on a bit of a journey in a minute about the notion of how we view our thinking about the marketplace. And this is somewhat of a longer term discussion rather than a shorter term discussion. And we've observed in here that one of the real benefits that we have in the beef business is we have access to, we call it the arsenal of Meat and Livestock Australia. Because sitting within the walls, the filing cabinets and the brains of people, we have the opportunity to draw on more and more information about the marketplace. So Mark, I know you and I talk quite a lot about the notion of the idea of pushing our product out into the marketplace or pulling our product through into the marketplace. Would you like to elaborate on that concept and deal with some of those key issues?
Yeah, thanks Gordon, and hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I love talking about this subject. Obviously it's something I'm a bit passionate about, so if I get a bit too crazy you'll understand why. There's plenty of opportunity right now in Australian beef, and it's a time to be excited about those opportunities, but it's also a time to be very, organised or strategic and also tactical about our thinking and in terms of understanding what market opportunities are out there and then how to position ourselves to take advantage of them. So, and look, in a half-hour session, it's really difficult to sort of get down into tin tack. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is principle-based, and like Gordon said, there's a bunch of information that's available to us from MLA, and really would encourage you to make that investment in getting to understand a lot of the work that they're doing around markets and opportunities, and see how they might align, or you might be able to align your business moving forward with some of those opportunities. Just to suffice to say that today is going to be a lot of high-level principle stuff, and certainly when we get into the CEO mentoring program, when we're in the face-to-face meetings and the inter-meeting mentoring stuff, there's a lot more detail that's discussed. And so when we talk about marketing, for those that are on the webinar, it's going to mean different things to different people. It depends on what sort of business you have, and also depends where you are in terms of developing your business and looking at what your production is and how it can address some of the opportunities out there. But the line in the sand really is the distinction between a trader and a marketer, and I know in agriculture we often hear, it doesn't matter what sector you're in, we often hear, you know, we're price takers, not price makers, and that's true. Historically, that's how it's been. We've tended to focus on making our profit by making sure that we are the most efficient farmers that there are in the world, and certainly having fairly extensively, we are. You know, there are some great farmers in Australia, undoubtedly some of the best in the world, and the way we've tended to, not for everyone, but the way we've tended to make sure that there's a gap between what it costs to produce something and what we get paid for it, is to make sure that we're producing it in the most cost-effective way, and of course that discipline must continue. We are in a high cost environment. Our production does tend to, you know, particularly labour being the biggest component, and then transport being the biggest components of our production. You know, we need to stay absolutely focused on managing our costs. So what we talk about today might not be for everyone, or it might not be for everyone yet. And also the other thing, it might not be for all your production. You might find that there's only a portion of your production that could fit into some of this stuff that we're going to talk about. And if I was to draw a line, say, from some other industries that I've worked in the past or with in the past, and we have a saying that, you know, 20% of your product tends to deliver 80% of your profit, or 20% of your customers tend to deliver 80% of your profit. That 80-20 rule tends to apply, and if in agriculture, if you're just producing the one product or maybe two products and they're all going to the same customer, and you're making those decisions based on, you know, market forces, you're just being a price taker, then it's very hard to see how that 80-20 rule applies in your business. So what we're going to talk about today, just quickly, is how to develop some markets that can give you the opportunity to differentiate your product, and then capitalise on, you know, what profit, additional profit that some of those subordinate, parallel markets, whatever you want to call them, might offer to your business. So as we move through what's on the slide in front of us, there's a couple of principles that we just want to run through. The first one is not that how important it is to have knowledge. So we've talked about, you know, availing ourselves of whatever market intelligence is out there, and certainly you know, MLA is a wonderful resource, and would encourage you again to go back and see some of the great work that they're doing. Then you've got to relate that back to the product that you have the capacity or the capability to produce, and then look at who is your potential customers, so that you can start talking to them about what you do, and this means about taking responsibility. We talk about being proactive in marketing. All proactive really means is taking personal responsibility for the marketing of your product, rather than just taking what comes down the line. Once you do that, we then start to move. Once you've got these solid relationships, people understand your business, they understand what your motivations are, they understand the quality and the potential differentiation that your product offers to them in their marketplace. Then they start to demand your product. So we have a demand-driven model, which then gives us an opportunity to value add, and we've got a pull-through situation. We're not having to push product out into the market. Right up front, you know, like I said earlier, it's difficult if you're haven't had a history in engaging in that. You might be frustrated to see how that can possibly happen, but just to let you know that, you know, from a practical sense, Gordon and I have both worked with customers who've had an ambition to move their model from, you know, commodity production type operation to where they wanted to segment markets and realise opportunities where there's additional profit available, and it can be done successfully. And you know, I just really want to close this side by saying that with the right amount of work and the right amount of research, and then identifying the right places in the market and developing the right relationships, you definitely can, in Australian agriculture, move your production towards that space. So they're the key principles that we want to run through. Just to summarise, is that first of all, you've got to understand where you are and what your history is. And when we talk about marketing, it's going to mean different things to different businesses. Understanding that the ambition is to move away from being a price taker to a price maker, and that might not be for all your products or for all your production. That you might have to find new customers, which means new relationships, and that takes time to develop. And lastly, you leverage the information that's out there. Call on what MLA's got available and start researching you know, what your production, what your capability and capacity is to match some of those opportunities. So thanks, Gordon.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'd actually like to tell a little story about an experience both you and I had, which I think could be instructive for this discussion. We were working with a particular client, and they in fact had the model right, just like you explained. In that, well, it's arguable whether it was absolutely right, but it was a good start. In that there was a chunk of product going to a very high value export customer, and there was a chunk of product going into the supermarket sector. And I guess the beauty of the role that we became involved in was the articulation and making real of the principles that you've talked about here today. In other words, we actually had to go and build a new relationship with the supermarket. And suddenly, once we appeared and started to build that relationship with the supermarket buyers, we had the opportunity to actually tell the story about quality, reliability, consistency, and all of those sorts of things. And that always preceded the discussion that we ultimately got to about the money at the end of the game. Now the value of that was that underpinned the business, that almost commodity market, but we were actually able to get the money side of it up in terms of its return to our clients. Equally, we saw an opportunity in the export market that wasn't being fully capitalised on. And again, through building relationships and establishing a gradual process of building greater trust, a greater understanding of what their needs were and what their end customers' needs were, we were able to actually expand that part of the marketplace. And I guess that's instructive because we actually had to do considerable market research and find out who those customers were, what their needs were, what their requirements were, who to go and build a relationship with, and then how to engage with them in the best possible way, and then to build a relationship up over time. So it wasn't simply one phone call, it was a range of face-to-face meetings to build that relationship, to build that trust, to find out what their needs were. So Mark, anything you'd like to add to that before we move on, particularly about that story?
No, that's fine, but it does lend itself to the next slide. So
let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay, so we started to talk then about the marketplace, and this particular customer that we were talking about, we ended up having to create some new products for that particular customer because they were meeting the needs of their end users, so to speak. And we've got in this slide the concept of end users and next users. So part of the question, which I'm sure you'll deal with in a minute, Mark, is who in fact is the customer and what exactly are their product requirements? And they might exist today, or they might be a twinkle in someone's eye, so to speak. So Mark, perhaps could you elaborate on these changes that we're seeing, particularly in the beef marketplace in both domestic and export settings?
Yeah, the next two slides kind of run into each other, and Gordon's example illustrates the point that we actually, in this case, we didn't actually have to go and find a new customer. We had a customer, we just hadn't taken the time to work out what their next needs were. And so it was interesting by moving and engaging with that customer about what their customers were needing, we were able to identify an opportunity and negotiate a position with that customer, with the supermarket, that allowed them to take advantage of additional profit opportunity, and then that gave us an opportunity to negotiate a strong position to support that and realise some additional profit as well. Now, to be fair, we know what that strategy will be moving forward for, say, someone like a supermarket, because they're going to say, okay, let's manage our risk, let's go and find a number of suppliers who can meet that particular product, and of course that erodes our ability to maintain our supply relationship and leverage margin off that. However, once you learn how to do that, and this is really what we're talking about, is once you learn how to go and find an additional opportunity, while we're running that process and letting that market mature with a particular customer, we're out finding the next opportunity and always moving the market forward. Now that's what this slide's about, is that there are big changes in ag, and they're not happening over years, they're happening over months. There are subtle changes in the consumer's needs, and the smart producers are looking to find out what those needs are before they become commodity driven. And as much as we're excited about how much production Australia has, and yet we produce a lot of beef, but in a global sense we could almost say that we are a niche producer, or at least there's an opportunity for us because of our flexibility, our nimbleness, to identify some of those segments and go after them. And there's plenty of examples. I mean, grass-fed, organics, there's plenty of history where Australia has led in terms of new market or new position development in an existing and mature marketplace. I just really want to encourage you to be a part of that story. Get on the front end of that. Be a leader rather than a follower. And you'll be surprised. It doesn't have to be on a global basis. It can be on a local basis. You talk about local butchers. We talk about other food processors, food service industries, even hotels. And Gordon and I had an experience of taking product to an individual hotel chain and just being able to supply them. So there's plenty of opportunities for these niche markets, but you've got to be out there looking for them, or you've got to be partnered with people who are out there looking for them on your behalf. We can talk about products, we can talk about systems and technology, and again, when we talk about technology in our sense, we are not talking about production technology. That's very important, but we're talking about marketing. How do we, social media, electronic direct mail, there's a bunch of stuff, branding, and we want to talk about branding on the next slide, but there's a bunch of stuff that we can be doing that can create a space for us in a very complicated and very noisy market that allows us to establish a position. And that can be collective or it can be an individual business. So, the take-home message from this slide is that the market is changing. There are changes, and it can be massive shifts, but it can be individual shifts. It can be right down to a market of one. That might be enough to generate that additional profit that you're looking to achieve. Anything else,
Mark,
Gordon?
I've got a little example that I might bring to bear here because it brings up a number of things that are on this slide here. So recently I saw an innovation called a 360-degree camera, which is the opportunity for us to go out in the paddock, so to speak, and actually show real-life examples of what we're doing right now in the paddock. So on the one hand, that's a lovely bit of technology. On the other hand, the question is, how might you use it? So when we were in the US earlier this year, we actually saw some of the high-value Australian grass-fed beef on the shelves of some of those niche supermarkets. And we noticed the animal welfare rating. And so the question that I explored with this particular person who had this 360-degree camera was, how would it be possible for us to differentiate ourselves as the supplier of a particular high-value, animal welfare-friendly product to the marketplace? And the answer was through the use of social media, through the use of the 360-degree camera, and all sorts of other bits of technology. Now, if I was sitting in my own shoes, I'd be starting to ask myself a whole series of questions about exactly how that would work and the potential pitfalls. At the same time, there's the opportunity to have the same discussion with myself about what are the opportunities. So that's really what this slide is about, is saying, well, all of these changes are happening out there in the marketplace in terms of our customers. What change in thinking can we bring to bear to allow us to snag those high-value customers that we talked about in the last slide? So let's move on. We've been, I guess, gradually narrowing our focus and our funnel down to this idea of the customer-centric approach, which is being very clear exactly who our customer is and what their needs are, how to engage with them, how to connect with them, and how to forge that long-term relationship. And so ultimately, as you've probably already gathered by now, the relationship is the critical bit of engaging with the customer. So Mark, in terms of the customer-centric approach, what comments would you like to make, particularly about the customer side of things, our marketing strategy, and building those relationships? Mark, I think you must be still on mute.
No, I'm not. I had an internet outage for about 20 seconds, so I'm back online.
So could you elaborate on some of these points about the customer-centric approach?
Sure. This is about brand. Now, this slide's about brand. Now, when we talk about brand, people think we're talking about, the label on a packet. And for some businesses, that's right. It's the label on a packet. But for others, it's the brand that you present to a potential supply chain partner or even to a consumer. If we think about a retail butcher. So when we talk about brand, we're talking about things like creating an emotional connection between what you do and the customer. So Gordon's story about the 360 camera, or if you want to talk about another example where, we've got a farmer showing, videos above produce that's sitting in a supermarket in Singapore, that's about cultivating an emotional connection between the product and the customer. We're talking about great brands that don't imitate but innovate. That's what we're talking about, and it might be the innovation that you put in terms of the relationship you have with a particular customer. How can this relationship work for both of us? That's the type of thing. When we talk about brand and having a market or a pull-through, trying to develop a pull-through business model, it's about attracting the customers that suit your business, not the other way around. And there's always customers are out there for your product. It's just putting the effort into trying to find where they are and who they are. When we talk about brand, it's brand people who are pull through, who are looking to develop a market that's demand driven. They sweat the small stuff. It's those intimate relationships that actually sustain this whole process. It's when people are creating a great brand, like I said, doesn't have to be a name on a packet. It might be just about a relationship. But because you've created the value, you never have to give back. You're always being appreciated for what it is that you're doing. And great brands, once you commit to this process, you stay committed. You don't vacillate, because inconsistency is what kills brand. And I remember Gordon going to sit in a meeting in Singapore for a supplier who was going into Southeast Asia, and he said to me, the problem with you Australians, he says, is that when the domestic market in Australia is really solid, you don't want to supply me. And then when it's not doing so good in Australia, you want to ring me up and export stuff. He said, in those markets, it just doesn't work like that. Once you're committed, you're committed. Now, he's speaking, very generally, and certainly not all producers in Australia are like that. But it was interesting that that's the type of feedback that we get when we go and talk about marketing, and this really just takes me to that last slide, which is, or the last point on the slide, which is about customer service. And you know, the way I encourage, you know, people to think about customer service is to understand the difference between service and hospitality. Service, you know, meeting customer expectations is just meeting customer expectations, and some customer expectations are really low. But if you have a hospitality mentality, you know, think about when someone comes to your house for a meal, you have prepared the food that they like, you have the drinks ready that they like. That's the difference between, you know, just meeting customer service expectations and actually delivering a service that's based on hospitality. It's a significant difference, and not something that is culturally the norm in Australian business operations. And certainly, if you're going to address these new opportunities that are coming to us as agricultural producers in Australia, we need to understand what it means to have you know, that customer service attitude of hospitality rather than just meeting current expectations. Sorry, Gordon, have I gone on too long?
No, that's fine, Mark. Just something I'd like to add about this whole question of customer-centric approach. You commented about the concept of a brand, and I know people can sometimes, as you said, get stuck in their mind that it's the label that's on the packet or whatever it may be. In many cases, it is indeed the personal relationship and therefore the personal brand of the people themselves who are supplying the product. And what we're ultimately on about with this, pardon me, relationship is the emotional connection that you mentioned before. And I think sometimes that's a little bit difficult for people to get their minds around, that it is that emotional connection. And so I know you talked about the Singapore example, and that was all about, pardon me, taking an emotional connection that had existed and had gone somewhat sour and rebuilding the relationship and rebuilding the emotional connection. And what we were about was setting our clients apart from the traders to be the people who have and understand and will build on a 5 to 10 year relationship. And when you look at the swings and roundabouts, that's where the money's to be made.
Yeah, and just to finish up, because this is the last technical slide we've got, and I just want to go back to the point that for some listening to this webinar, what we're talking about might seem a long way off. It might seem really abstract. However, that doesn't mean that it's not this type of thinking is not of value, because when we come to the application of this type of thinking and we sit and we start to talk about the detail involved, you will be surprised how much it actually can apply to even the most commodity-driven business. There are opportunities out there, and taking a customer-centric approach will deliver additional profits to your business. It's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Before we move to the next slide too, just observe that in the red meat industry at the moment there are some very strong moves, even at processor level, to look at building those relationships, because they're increasingly looking to see where the best connection is with the people who've got the best product. So it is real at that commodity level, and it's certainly real, say, at a butcher level or whatever it may be. So let's keep going. So Mark, here we're talking about the distinction between the basic connection, I guess, with the marketplace and how to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. And this is, I guess, a conceptual discussion, but could you maybe elaborate on these points?
Yeah, so this is speaking to what we talk about customer engagement or selling or customer service, whatever label you want to put on it. The one on the left are the basics, and sometimes we think that's all that's necessary, but from a customer point of view, they can get those 4 things from anywhere. That is not going to differentiate your business from anyone else's. And while we think, well, I've met the customer expectations, I've got good product knowledge, I'm competitively priced, and I'm easy to do business with, so why doesn't he want to keep doing business with me anymore? Or why can't I find someone who'll take up, what I've got to offer, because I do this stuff really well? Well, that's just a right to play the game. to appreciate some of these values, you've got to move to some of these differentiators, and there are others. But just to talk through the ones we've got on the screen, we talked about proactivity. It means taking responsibility and actually anticipating customer needs, not waiting for them to come and tell you what they are, because then it's too late, and then you're in a commodity situation because there will be other people who they will be talking to. The next thing is industry knowledge, not just product knowledge. When people want to talk to you, they want to know that you've got some credibility that's broader than just the product that you produce. You want to focus on value, and you want to define what the value is so you can actually tell the story. All right, if you can't tell the story, people don't know what they're paying the extra for. The last thing is seamless integration. So if you're involved in a supply chain, they don't want to talk to 3 or 4 people, they want to talk to one person who manages the whole thing. And just to reinforce the idea that this is all about relationships, this is all about product. This is all about relationships, it's never about the product. The product has to be what it has to be, the price has to be what it has to be, but it's relationships that actually differentiate. And like we talked about that example in Singapore, if you have a great relationship with say an Asian market, or someone who operates in an Asian market, they will ride the bumps with you. If you had to ring them up and say, Lee, I need to charge you more for the next couple of months because things happen, we had a drought or whatever, they'll probably ride it out with you. They won't drop you. But as long as you've got a solid relationship and you've stuck with them when there was an opportunity for you to go somewhere else and maybe make a few extra dollars. It's the relationship in terms of the marketing that we're talking about, not the mass marketing, not the big commodity stuff, that's a different story. Then the marketing that we're talking about, it's the relationship that's key.
Thanks, Mark. Just one thing to add before we move on. I think an important thing to consider is engaging with the customer in the customer's language. So when we get involved in some of our longer term programs, the thinking always is to put ourselves in the customer's shoe, understand what it is that drives the customer, understand what their values are, understand what their needs are on a day-to-day basis. When we put ourselves in the customer's shoes and we can talk in customer's language, that supports us building that relationship at the emotional and the objective level as well. So as we draw this to a close now, we always complete with the notion of what are we doing with this business Northern Beef Business Mentoring Program. Effectively, it's about 3 elements. One is going through the process that we're going through at the moment, which is making sure people have some insights into what's going on in the contemporary marketplace. And we're very aware that half an hour, or in this case close to 40 minutes, is a little difficult to deal with a whole heap of information, but at least it gives people thought starters, and that's the objective. Those thought starters can lead on to some pieces of gold as people sort of think about those 1, 2 or 3 things that they need to do differently to take them from where they are now to where they want to be. So that leads us on to the Better Beef Business Workshop, which is a 1-day program, and it's like the rest of this program at the moment, quite heavily subsidised by the partners. And its objective is to get people to do a stock take, provide the opportunity for 1 day to become the outsider looking in to the business and say, what's going well, what's not going so well, what's my longer term game plan, my end in mind, what do I need to do differently? So where am I now, where do I want to be, what do I need to change, how do I need to change it, and what do I need to do? And then some people leave that and say, okay, I've got a good picture of what I need to get going on with. Human nature being what it is though, sometimes we get stuck in the daily grind. And sometimes if we've got a very specific game plan that requires a rapid transition, the idea of somebody mentoring us or supporting us through the change process and giving us more detail where we can actually work through things at a personal level is terribly helpful. So what we've done today is like a mini workshop setting. The one thing that we haven't done and that we would far prefer to do is have a discussion, an open discussion and a conversation. And that's what the Northern Beef CEO Mentoring Program is about, is to provide information, provide the opportunity then for the open discussion and for people to do their own personal work and discuss it with ourselves, the other specialists that we bring in, and also like-minded business people. So that's effectively what this program is all about. And it's about, you could regard it as being a professional development program. It's about building the business skills as opposed to production skills, although you can't divorce the two of them. And it's ultimately focused on what it is that people ultimately want to achieve, which is the end game for them. So it could well be about money. It could be about the sleep at night factor. It could be about doing some things that are really irritating people differently and better. And ultimately it's about a collaborative approach. So as we conclude, some of you might be listening to this and think, I am interested. You're most welcome to give Mark or myself a call, or to send us an email, or to visit our webpage. It's important to realise that in August and September this year there are a range of one-day workshops coming up in southern Queensland, and in mid-October is when the CEO mentoring program for this year will be getting underway. So if you're interested in any of those things, please let us know. Dave, how are we off in terms of questions or observations? Anything that we can comment on briefly before we wind up?
I think given the time, we'll just try and endeavour to get back to people with the questions afterwards. Okay,
and look, I can see some questions are being posed, so we will get back to you, because I'm very mindful that we've gone over time, so we'll just supply that information back to you. So as we draw this to a close, when this webinar finishes, those of you who are online will receive a questionnaire. It's very short and sharp, and its objective is to help us refine the things that come out of these webinars, and to, I guess, address points of interest that might be coming up in people's minds as a result of them. So Mark, anything further from you before we wind up?
No, that's fine, Gordon. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, and thank you all for attending, and we'll get back to you with those questions I can see flashing. Thanks very much, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye for now.